the hymn goes like this. Glorious things of thee are spoken, Zion, city of our God. Glorious thing. You know the hymn? It's taken from the Psalms. It's taken from the Psalm we read today, but not in the same translation. Psalm 87, verse 3. It's on the front of the bulletin this morning. And in the NIV and some other translations, it says, glorious things are said of you, O city of God. The person who wrote this hymn, Glorious Things of Thee Are Spoken, was John Newton, a name you might find familiar because he's the same John who wrote Amazing Grace. And it comes to us as one of the great songs of our faith. And in this 87th Psalm that we read from a different translation, because the normal translation is almost impossible to understand. It's academics and scholars call this the most difficult psalm to translate, but it makes sense in the CEV. It gives us a picture of God's people in Zion. And it talks about the fact that there will be dancing and singing in Zion as God's greatness and goodness in Zion is celebrated. One of the things I love about the Hebrews of the Old Testament and the Jews of today is that they are such an earthy people. We have way too much Greek and way too little Hebrew in our religion. You know, the Greeks were all in their head, reason, and they left out the heart, but not the Hebrew. They were head and heart together, both important, head and heart. And so when they sang the Psalter or when they read the Psalter, it would often include dancing. And when they would sing, they would move around. They wouldn't be like Presbyterians, We stand so stiff and sing so Presbyterian, but no, not the Hebrews. They wouldn't think of that. When they celebrate, when the scrolls are taken out of the synagogue and taken to the fellowship hall, and they carry the scrolls out, these Hasidic Jews, they would all dressed in black, with the black hats and the black coats and the white shirts. They would start singing and dancing and clapping as the scrolls were taken out of the synagogue. What a happy time. Yeah, they would always dance and sing. Bar mitzvahs or bat mitzvahs, that they would sing and dance. People would gather in groups. They would put their arms around each other and they would sing and they would dance. And sometimes somebody would get inside the circle and they would just do a free dance, 2 or 3 people at a time. Hava Nagila, you know how that goes? Let us rejoice. I can't stand still. If I were planting a new church, it would have Hebrew dancing. It would have black African American clapping and singing. It would be the strangest looking Presbyterian church you have ever seen. And so this psalm, it's about singing and it's about dancing. What are they so happy about? In the reading, we may have discovered here that there are people from all these different places that have gathered to Zion. And there's a list of them. If you follow the list, these 5 nations that are gathered in Zion, they're from Egypt, and they're from Ethiopia, and they're from Phoenicia, and they're from Philistia, and they're from Babylonia. I made it through, didn't I? I got them all. And they're gathered into Zion. And one of them says, where are you from? And the one from Egypt says, I was born in Zion. And the one from Ethiopia says, you were born in Zion? I was born in Zion. And the one from Babylonia said, I can't believe this. I was born in Zion. And so it goes around the group of all of these nations. I was born in Zion. Egypt. You know, in the scripture that we read this morning, it says Egypt, and in some of the translations it will say Egypt. But in Hebrew, it doesn't say Egypt. It gives the nickname Rahab. Rahab. You know what Rahab means? Monster. These 5 nations are the enemies of Israel. They were the people who defeated Israel in battle. They were the nations that made them slaves for 400 years. They were the nations that took them off into captivity. These were the nations that Israel hated. And here they are in Zion, and they're all saying, I was born in Zion. What happens? Why would they say that? Well, the reason is every time they would take off a group of God's people and take them to Babylonia or take them to Philistia or wherever, they would gather these Jews, the Hebrews, they would gather into the communities, and these nations would watch them. They would observe them. They would see how they loved. And they would watch them in their festivals, and they would see how they celebrated Sabbath times. And they would watch them, and they would see how they took care of their old. And they would observe the way they lived in the world. In Egypt and Philistia and Phoenicia, Babylonia, Ethiopia. And there were people who would look at them and say, whatever you've got, I want to be a part of that. And so then when there was this family reunion back in Zion, people from Egypt would say, I was born in Zion. They weren't physically born in Zion. They were spiritually born in God's presence in Zion. I was born in Zion. That's the way faith works. It is meant to be seen and therefore grow. And grow in the most unlikely places. One of my favorite readings, one of my favorite books of all time, a top 10 list of all the books I've ever read, is a book by Thomas Cahill entitled How the Irish Saved Civilization. Don't know if anyone's read that book, but it's a marvelous story about how Ireland became Christian. You know the story? Of course, St. Patrick has to be a part of it. He didn't drive out the snakes. He did a lot greater stuff than that. Here was a 16, 17-year-old boy living in England near what is now the border of Wales. And he's kidnapped. This teenager is kidnapped, and he's taken to Ireland, where for about 7 years he's a slave. He's a shepherd's slave. He practically starves to death. He almost has nothing to wear. He practically freezes to death. It's a terrible time in his life. And ultimately he finds a ship that takes him out of Ireland. He goes away. And the next thing we know, he's coming back. This time as a missionary. Isn't that amazing? The people who enslaved him Now he goes back to love them. He's one of those Patrick is in that cloud, this great cloud. You've got people in your cloud, don't you? Some of your parents or grandparents, people who are members of this church who are no longer here, people in your life. And there's this cloud. Patrick's in that cloud. And, sometimes when I want to give up, when I really don't know, can I take another step? Can I really go on? What holds me more than anything else is all what they've done, how they've lived, and the example and the joy that I can't let go of, and so I take another step forward because there's got this cloud of witnesses and I can't let go. And so Patrick goes back to Ireland, and what happens? Well, you know what happens. The faith that's in his heart, the love that's in his heart, the forgiveness that's in his heart, the joy that's in his heart goes to another, and then to another, and it grows, and it grows, and it grows. And finally, there are people who gather into little communities. They're called monks, and they build little beehive huts, and they form communities. They're communities of joy and faith and laughter. The Irish think that the thing that drives the devil crazy more than anything else is laughter. They were funny little people. And one of the things that they did, and attracted, that people would see this. They would see what was happening. They would see how they lived. They would watch them love. They would watch them sing and pray and laugh. And they wanted to be a part of it. And so I was born in Zion. They started coming in. And people from across the waters, people from Europe and other places, they hear about it. And they're pulled into Ireland. And they bring with them books. And these Irish monks, they love those books. And they would make copies of the books that were brought in from Europe. But they weren't just copies. If you've ever seen the Book of Kells, if you've ever seen any of that Irish, they're gorgeous. They're unbelievable. The way they were adorned with color, picture. And they copied these books. It's a long and complicated history, but eventually these monks were not content just to let people come in from all these places. They decide to go. They decided to go into a Europe that had fallen into what we call the Dark Ages. For the barbarians had destroyed Rome, burned churches, and burned libraries, burned the books. It was a holocaust of learning. All the ancient books and all of the ancient learning that had been in Europe were gone. They were burned. They were destroyed. And now Europe is in this darkness. And into the heart of darkness go these monks, these little laughing monks. And they take their books. And books that have never been read for centuries are now reintroduced back into Europe. They go everywhere. They go as far as Russia. Some of the great cities of Europe today, such as Vienna and Salzburg and other cities, grew up from these monasteries, these monks who gathered into communities. And people began to come and to see and to hear and to look and see whatever you've got, whatever it is, I need. For it's so different from what I know. To love everybody? To pray for your enemies? To forgive 70 times 7 times 7 times 7? To honor your parents and the old, to take care of the vulnerable and the sick? So amazing. I've got to have that. It's so different. The monks, though, that I like best, of all of these monks that went all over Europe and brought the books, brought the faith, back to England that had become pagan, back to Europe where the learning and the faith had been destroyed. The monks that I like best are the ones that got in the boats without oars. They didn't know where they were going to go. They said, God, wherever we're supposed to go, send us, because we're not even going to have an oar. We're just going to let you take us wherever we need to be. Which I think is a lot like our lives, isn't it? We don't know where we are. We don't know where we're supposed to go. But that's what faith looks like, I think. God, you've got the oars. I'll get in the boat. Send me. Send me wherever I'm supposed to be. And so, with the psalmist, with the Irish, with the Europeans, we join them today in saying, I was born in Zion. I have found my home. By the way, if you went back to the CEV and you read near the last part of that psalm, it says that God was there making a list of all those who belong to Zion. God's making a list. He's taking names. God's writing down in a book everybody who belongs to Zion. And I was looking at that list recently. God let me look at it. I looked at it, and by golly, I saw some of your names. Actually, I saw all of your names. I was so glad to see it, because you're all there. You and I, we're all born in Zion to the glory of God. Amen.